So, first of all, thank you very much for presenting for us today. Jackie is the founder of LeadMe Academy, which is an online leadership platform. She's also head business coach at the Investing Startup School Program and director of Consult Us. She's a qualified neuro leadership coach and has a BA in honors in organizational psychology. Jackie, how's your slides going there? Are you managing?
Yes, sorry, there we go. I think that should be there now.
Jackie, we look forward to hearing what you have to share with us today on the topic of megatrends impacting workforces, leadership, and learning. And with that, I would love to hand over to you. I can see your slides perfectly. Perhaps you could all join me and give Jackie a round of applause by using the little clapping hands icon at the bottom right of your screen. Wonderful. So, pity there's no sound. It would sound like we really are in a room full of people, but there's your round of applause, Jackie. And with that, I'm going to hand over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Adria. Okay. Thank you for the warm welcome. Hello, everybody. I am really excited to be speaking with all of you today and to be sharing the megatrends impacting workforces, leadership, and learning. I'm going to dive straight into this conversation today and get the ball rolling because there's quite a lot that I'd like to talk through. So I know that most of you in the room are HR professionals or are connected to that in some way or form. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here today. So I want to start by asking this question. As an HR professional or leader, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much has your role or the pace changed over the last 2 years? So 10 being it is fast tracked, it is extreme, there's been so much change, and 1 being, hey, we were ahead of the trends. We're totally cool and collected. Where are you at? Okay, so I'm seeing 100. Yeah, I love that. Okay, I'm seeing 10, I'm seeing 9s, I'm seeing 10s. Okay, all right. So most people in the room are resonating and saying, sure, the last 2 years, it has been intense and it has been fast tracked, right? I think we can safely say that most people working in the HR profession or space felt a little bit like this. There's just been so much that has impacted this world or this profession. And I would argue that this profession has, in fact, been hit harder than many of the others, right? It has just been coming at us from all different directions. If we rewind 2 years, it looked a little bit like this, right? Prior to the pandemic, we were all kind of working in an office space. We were collaborating and connecting around the water cooler. We were learning and having classroom-based learning inside our offices. We were sitting right next to each other. We were engaging every day. And if we fast track 2 years to today, we're kind of looking a little bit more like this, right? Somewhere between that. And the reality is that the HR profession has been the one that has had to kind of quickly get the grips of what has changed and how it has shifted the way that we work. And so today's conversation is going to be really looking at what are these trends that the pandemic to some extent has either set into motion or seriously sped up. And there is a particular framework that I'd like you to use as a lens for thinking about the trends that we are going to discuss today. So many of you may be familiar with the iceberg model or the levels of perspective model. This is a tool for understanding systemic thinking or to understand a system. And all of us are operating in a system, right? So if we just go through this from the top down, there has been a set of events that has taken place, right? Which was the pandemic and some more events that set a set of trends and patterns that have either been happening already, but have now been fast tracked. And in this process, it has started to question our systemic structures. So the structures and the way that we do work and the way that things are, the frameworks that we use to effectively work have all been bending and breaking to some extreme. And below that, we have a set of mental models, a set of assumptions or beliefs or values about the way the world works, the way work should work, how we should come together and so forth that have been put into question. So just want to stop there for a second and just really say, the reality of human beings is that we all have thousands of beliefs. We have beliefs about what is right or wrong in the world, how things should or should not be done. And these are being questioned all the time. And I would argue that the mega trends that have been put into place are are really impacting our value system and our beliefs. And this in turn is impacting our vision for what we originally imagined the future to be. This has been disrupted to some degree. So as we move through this session today, I want you to try and hold this lens. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about events and patterns, but then later on, we're going to come all the way back to mental models and vision. And I want you to start thinking as we talk through the trends, how might the trends be directly related to beliefs, values, and mental models that are being questioned underneath, and which of yours are still holding true and which maybe need to be upgraded. And this idea that we kind of have been moving from a very reactive space, and this idea that we can really spin it and start to move from a more generative place. If we start to look actually bottom up, back, how can we start making some changes to increase the leverage that we have? So keep this front of mind as we move through today. Maybe a simpler way to almost display this would be the pandemic was this big event that set another trend or event into motion, which was remote work. And that set a whole lot of other trends in motion. Many of these trends were already in motion. They're not necessarily new, but there are other variables that impacted them in addition to the pandemic and remote work, but they have been brought to the forefront. And they are now trends that we are grappling with and we are working with at the moment. And as I say, as we work our way through this conversation today, or this talk, should I say, we're going to start thinking about at the end, let's come back and really evaluate, well, what are the underlying beliefs and values that are driving these different trends, and how might these be in conflict, and what does this mean for leadership? So that's the approach we're taking in today's discussion. So I want to ask you this. So there's all of you in the room today. Let me know, what is your preference when it comes to remote work? So A, remote only, B, hybrid, or C, in office exclusively. If you can hit the chat box now with A, B, or C, just so I can get a feel for the room. Okay, so I'm seeing lots of B's, 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 all B's. All right. Oh, wow. Everybody's a B. Okay, so no A's even, and no C's. Okay, that's fascinating to hear and to see. Okay, so that sits probably about bang on with kind of what we're seeing in the stats that are out there, depending on the sources that you're looking at. They're saying that between 48% and 97.6%, depending on the source, are all about this kind of a remote hybrid working world, and that 1 in 3 professionals would look for a new job if they do not have this this choice, right? If they are forced back into the office in full time. So it's clear that we are aligned, that this group is somewhere similar to these stats, but pretty much quite extreme. And I think the realization is, and even just by the voices in the room, the hybrid world of work is here to stay, right? This is a movement that is happening, that people are getting to grips with, but it's a lot more complex than it seems at the surface level. So what I find so fascinating is that when Gallup did a bit of research into who wants, the hybrid world, who wants the remote world, who wants fully on site, the factors that came up were interesting because they were all similar, but they were also people who answered them needed them in the different areas. So what I mean by that is, you'll see, so productivity seems to be important across all 3 spaces. So we've got people saying no, they want to be fully on site because that increases their productivity. And we've got people saying no, they want to be fully remote because that increases their productivity. And then we've got people saying no, but hybrid actually increases my productivity. And then you've got the same thing for well-being. So we've got well-being, and if you look at the numbers, they're almost quite close together, right? People are saying that I want to be fully on site because it actually increases my well-being. I want to be completely hybrid because it increases my well-being. 48%, 30%, and 44% fully remote. So I find this pretty fascinating. There's something going on here that is showing us that, sure, so despite whether it's on-site, remote, or fully hybrid, we're still seeing that the same things are cropping up: well-being, productivity, flexibility, but there's something unique that's going on. And in addition to that, we have some more results that are quite fascinating. So And these changes to the way that we've worked, we've seen that 77% of people are saying that they are more productive when they're working remotely, but 64% of managers believe that employees are more productive in the office. All right. So now, just keeping that mental models in mind, right? 77% of people are saying they're more productive working remotely, but managers are saying that no, people who are in office are more productive. We're going to come back to this thought, but I want to let that kind of sizzle in your mind for a little while. And what does it really mean? In this remote world, in this hybrid world of work, we're seeing that one of the outcomes, which is interesting, is that employee networks seem to be decreasing to some extent. Siloed teams are increasing. Conversations with colleagues are decreasing. What's fascinating is obviously the resignation is up, but it's also increasing in certain spaces depending on the talent attraction and retention strategies. We're seeing that well-being seems to be up or down depending on the individual and not really depending on the choice there. Flexibility is up overall, diversity is on the up, and time and travel and time and infrastructure costs are down, right? So there's something really interesting going on here. And when we think about it, it starts to make us ask, so it's definitely not a one size fits all, right? We're realizing that there's something going on around these individual preferences. And I think what's fascinating is that for the first time, we are seeing 5 generations all in the workplace at the same time right now. So this is a really interesting thing to be thinking about. What does this mean? We've got our traditionalists, our boomers, our Generation X, millennials, and Generation 2020 and beyond, all in the same place. And their preferences and their belief systems are all different. If you look at the line item on changing jobs, for example, you'll see that there's a serious difference in what people want. And I think this explains some of the data that we're seeing, that why is it that well-being is seemed to be, for some people, they get more well-being if they're working remotely. For some people, they need to be hybrids. For some people, they want to be in the office to increase it. And the reality is that it's becoming incredibly individually focused. So we need to start thinking about, well, hang on a second, how are we going to create equilibrium within our organizations? Because there are these forces at play, but there's clearly a difference in individual preferences and circumstances of what people are wanting and needing. Organizational needs still need to be met, right, with strategic goals, purpose, and vision being achieved. And then these team needs around productivity, collaboration, connection, communication, and outcomes. How are we finding this way to bring this all into balance within the hybrid working world? And the reality is that flexibility is now key, and we are needing flexibility both at the individual level and the organizational level, and there needs to be some kind of match in place. And what we're seeing is that remote work has kind of been a catalyst for a whole lot of other trends that are worse. Some of them were in motion, but now they have been fast tracked. So one of the key trends that is now in place is the expanded employer role. So all of you, I'm sure you're going to resonate with this, and you can actually hit the chat box with a yes if you're realizing now how important it is that part of your process, or the way you reward your people, or the way you think about employee performance, is now about having to think about all of these factors, right? You need to take into account for fulfillment at work. What does that really mean? What is purpose, and how is that aligned within the organization? Work-life balance is now one of the most important benefits or that employees are looking for. Employers now have more of a responsibility within financial security and health, and that really means educating employees around this, taking a more active role in supporting employees and understanding where they're at with this. How does this work? How are we changing the work environment, and how are we looking after individuals' physical and mental well-being, as well as interpersonal relationships? Never before have employers been expected to look after so many different factors. And I saw Innocent wrote there in the chat box, humanizing the workplace. That's exactly what we're doing. And what is so fascinating about it is that this is actually becoming a predictor of employee performance and retention. So these key factors, making sure that we're thinking about it and thinking about them and building them into our strategies, is key for organizations, right? So the next thing that has kind of fired off and has become, and is something that I'm pretty sure you're all grappling with in some form or other right now. But collaboration has always been important in organizations, right? But remote work and the pandemic has taken it to a whole new level. And the idea now is, do we have the ability to think about and design organizations with collaboration in mind? Collaboration being the key starting point for how we think about our systemic structures and our mental models. Is that the first thing we think about when we are designing the workplace? So are we thinking about it from the physical and digital perspective, that it helps teams to work together and connect regardless of where they are? We're seeing now more than ever that organizations have to design the way that they work around cross-functional teams. Siloed teams are out. We need cross-functional teams. We need to be able to bring in traditional employees, gig workers, and contractors, and we need to make them part of the system. This is a trend that we'll speak to a little bit later, but it's here to stay, and we should be optimizing and not fighting it. But how do we make that part of our collaboration strategy? When we think about talent programs, have we shifted the way that we are thinking about how we can collaborate to create spaces where people can rotate through different jobs to gain more understanding of different working roles, to be able to cross pollinate? And then how are we leveraging digital platforms to create the opportunity for asynchronous work? And so lots of organizations are already using different tools, but how are we thinking about that first? And how are we also creating a feedback loop into the organization to go, which of these systems and processes are working? Are we now using too many and overloading our teams? Are we spending all day on meetings virtually to the point where our team members are exhausted and cannot get any work done? That's not promoting collaboration. So how are we really thinking about what is the key ways that we are using tools to actually drive collaboration, keep people focused and engaged? So something that we're all needing to really be thinking about. And what we've seen in the HR space is that it's been an interesting time, because I think for a long time HR was kind of not really seen as something that was connected into the tech space. But now there are thousands of different amazing tech solutions, just like the one we're on right now, that's helping us network and come together. And instead of fighting it, we need to start using it, because just like the start of this talk, we said how everybody is feeling kind of overwhelmed, and they're feeling like there's just so many different hats you've got to wear now in the HR profession. But how are we utilizing tech? So if you look at the far bottom right stat on the slide, it says 41% of HR professionals possess the necessary digital proficiency. So what this actually means is that we're saying that HR professionals don't necessarily need to be developers or anything like that, but you need to be able to read, apply, and create and communicate data to influence the way that you make decisions about what tools you use. And what we're seeing is that there's a low uptake and there's a lot of opportunity here. But the reality is, to keep up with the times, to manage all the different hats that we are being exposed to, and to be able to connect the dots between the different HR functions, we've got to start using technology. AI and machine learning is, if applied correctly within organizations, is reducing workload and increasing productivity. If we think about the blockchain and we think about the hybrid world of work, we have an increased need for security, and this is an answer to it. Are organizations putting in place, or do you have a knowledge management system that is pulling together all the different parts of HR, right from learning to benefits to payroll, to all these different parts that bridges the gaps between all of these? It's one place where you can go to access all of this knowledge. How are you utilizing the tools that are out there to take off that massive load of recruitment, right? How are you doing hiring and selecting? And then one of the biggest trends that has changed is performance metrics, right? We'll talk a little bit more about this later today, but we never before have we been able, we've had a need to start measuring performance differently, right? In this hybrid world of work, finally one of our mental models are being challenged. It's not about the number of hours, it's not about clocking in and out, it's about output. But do we really believe that? And how are we tracking it? How are we giving managers and leaders insights into data and tools that they can use to really understand the performance of their employees? How are we utilizing tech that connects people, places, and scheduling to the best best of our ability? And are we using tech for good? There's also been some horror stories around, I think it was Amazon had a biased hiring algorithm, and the other one was Uber's had I think it was a facial recognition software that was actually discriminatory. So really we've got to get our heads around this and start to kind of upskills ourselves in this area, and then see how we can use it to advance our role and our organizations. But one of the next biggest trends that has happened, and all of these trends are impacting each other and connected, but the reality is that if we start on the far left here, this idea of from cradle to grave work mentality is out of the window, right? No, most people in today's world don't want to work for one organization. I know our parents and their parents did 40 years in one company, but that's gone. What we're seeing now is that individuals will move jobs at least 4 times every 4 years, should I say. So there's this huge change in wanting to move. And you could say, if we went back to that slide and we thought about the baby boomers and the traditionalists, right? They are still sitting there with the cradle to the grave mentality, and that might still be important to them. But the rest of the job market, it's not important to the rest of the workforce. And how are we thinking about first, how are we scanning our workforce to know who is within our workforce, what are their needs? And if people are wanting to change jobs every 4 years, then how do we need to start rethinking the way that we work? The next one there is about this idea that 32% of organizations are replacing full-time employees with contingent workers as a cost-saving measure. So this is looking at contractors and freelancers and the gig world, right? This is a really positive thing. A lot of people are kind of like overwhelmed by this, against it, but it's good for organizations and it's good for individuals. It can really reshape the way people learn, the way they move around, the opportunities they get to have, and it's beneficial for the individual and the organization. So how do we get our mindset around that? That fourth picture in the top corner there is about the great resignation and this idea that so many people have left, right, or are leaving or changing the way that they're working. This together with digitalization and the way that we have our remote work has changed. We now no longer have this need to be in the same place, location as our job, right? We no longer have to be in a location-based place for our job. So this is a huge, huge factor that has totally change things. You can be living in South Africa, have the best of the weather here, but being paid in pounds, right? And this is changing the talent marketplace, which is the final picture that we see there. There's now this opportunity to be getting employees from all over the world. And same thing goes for employees being able to get opportunities around the world. And this is obviously creating a tight labor market. And it really has created a war for talent. And it's real, it's happening. But the question is, this is happening, and instead of fighting against it, how do we start to work with it? So if we're seeing that talent allocation is happening organically with contract-based work and freelance economy and so on, how do we utilize that and optimize it? There's lots of different roles within companies that this actually works perfectly for, and it's a more cost-effective way to work. How are we maximizing the talent that we already have? So the people that we do have, are we training and upskilling them? And how are we cross-pollinating? And how are we using the talent marketplaces to our advantage? I don't know how many organizations here today have done this yet, but for example, Unilever and Vodacom did a marketing exchange program where they actually switched up their marketing teams and got them to work on the different products. And it was an amazing experiment and it worked really well. This is some of the ways that you can start to get access to different skills, innovation, different ways of thinking, and so on. There's opportunity. People are wanting more flexibility. So how do we maybe start looking at paying people for 80% of their work output, and maybe that creates more space. Some people want a shorter week. Let's give it to them. How can we make that work? Let's stop thinking through the lens of time. Let's think about output. In our conversation earlier today, we were just talking about this idea about like who made the 8-hour day, and does it even work and fit into the knowledge workers' way of working? Is that we should really move away and from holding on to this 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, to just an output-based belief system, right? So we need to upgrade that, but we need to upgrade our systems and so on. And then one of the biggest things that I think organizations are facing is how do we work on culture. So often we think about organizational culture through the lens of when we are inside an organization, we experience the culture like when we were in the offices, right? But we can create a culture in the remote hybrid world that can be just as good. And what is surprising is actually how simple in some ways it can be. We are all humans at the end of the day. We all want social, we all want a sense of belonging, we want social recognition, and we want attention. And a simple thing, just like managers checking in once a week with their team members and asking 2 to 3 simple questions like, how are you doing? What are your priorities? What do you need support with? Just that alone creates an experience for employees that they are actually valued, someone cares about them and cares about how they're performing with their priorities. It is shocking, and I'm sure some of you will find this shocking, but I was chatting to someone yesterday and they told me that their supervisors in their organization had not met with their team members, not in person or virtually, in 2 years. I almost fell off my seat. I thought, no ways, people have got to grips with this, right? So there seems to be this breakdown in that some of these structures are not following through. And that will, of course, lose talent. Imagine not being checked in with from your supervisor in 2 years. It's absolutely crazy, right? So there's also simple things that we can be doing here as well, thinking about our rhythms and our structures and the way that we connect and provide attention to our people. But one of the clear things that is happening is that the traditional lifelong career development programs are outdated. This idea of the corporate ladder and this idea of keeping individuals within your team forever and a day, and that they're going to work for the same company for 40 years it's outdated. Sure, some of the traditionalists and baby boomers, as I spoke about earlier, may still want that, but for the most part, people don't want that. And what I find so fascinating is that organizations are still using the metric of how long someone has been with a company as a metric of performance. But it shouldn't be a metric of performance, because you can be with a company for 40 years, but it doesn't mean that you're contributing. The reality in today's world is that organizations outgrow people and people outgrow organizations. And I'm sure some of you in the room may have felt this or experienced this firsthand yourselves. But the key here to realize is that this is the change. And if people are adding value and they are growing with the organization, of course we want to keep them and do the best that we can. But it's also okay for people to come into companies, add extreme value on certain projects or ideas or spaces, and then leave. They've contributed, they've improved. Holding on to people sometimes is negative for the organization and the individual. The other thing that's changing is this idea that we have to start seeing the working world as this idea of a jungle gym and not a corporate ladder. We need to give our team members the opportunity to get not just vertical rising. Often vertical just means kind of moving up, managing people. Perhaps you get some leadership competencies, but you're not broadening your skills. When we move laterally, we're broadening skills. When we have rotational opportunities, we are broadening our skills, our insight, our understanding of different functions. And when we boomerang, which is kind of moving to leaving an organization and coming back 2 years later, we often come back with a new set of skills and enriched experience. And so what this really brings me to is the next trend, which is the skills economy has changed. The way that we are rewarding people has changed. It's no longer about tenure and about time that you spent at an organization. It's about the skills that you have. And I would go to so far to say that it's not even so much anymore about the skills that you have, like your educational history. Perhaps you studied a long-term degree. It's actually about like how much initiative do you take, how much do you upskill yourself. Someone who's upskilling themselves in a short course to get a skill that they need in the workplace should be rewarded, right? How are we changing the lens of our rewards? How are we thinking about using technology? It tracks within our organizations to upskill our people. I can tell you organizations that are already focusing on developing technical skills for the future within their companies are ahead of companies that aren't doing it. And they're more likely to be future fit if they are doing that now already. So our ability to map available internal skills is critical to the way we move forward. Our ability to use data to understand how we are developing skills, our ability to realize that we should be focusing on people's experience and the skills that they have are key to developing our company. And there's this new need need for soft skill development throughout organizations. We've got to realize that in cross-functional teams, being able to lead a cross-functional team is a skill in itself. And if we thought it was tough enough trying to build relationships in the organization around the water cooler, it's a whole lot harder working with people from all over the world in different countries and trying to develop that. There's a new need for soft skill development throughout organizations. And trend number 8 there is that retention, rewards, and remuneration will never be the same. Organizations have to go through a process of thinking about what have we already got in place? We need to, is it meeting the current needs? Have we got enough feedback from our employees about how they feel about our retention strategies? Have we included leadership in this conversation? Because they should have insight into what their people are wanting. If they don't, then they're not close enough to them. Have we identified goals and priorities? Do we know exactly what we're trying to achieve? And are we tying back our attention to the achievement of those goals, right? Something that I was speaking to earlier. How does this align to the strategy and the values and the culture of the organization? How are we keeping up with the trends, right? Are we looking at these trends, and then are we making it flexible, inclusive, and fair? And then what is the feedback loop on this process? Which brings me to the next trend, and I'm sure you're all very aware of it. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is on the forefront. It was just DI, then it became DI, and now it's DI and B, which is really the sense that people are wanting to belong, and they're wanting all of this to be thought about. They want to be part of a group. They want to be valued. They want to have the opportunity to share their thoughts and ideas and to feel like they matter. They want to have access to the equal opportunities, and they want to be represented fairly. Some of the key points that are happening is fairness is raising its head everywhere, right? People are saying, like, is gender-based pay gap is unreal. These things around looking at geographical salary considerations. I think Google has just started matching what they pay no matter on your location. So there's lots of conversations happening in this space and that we need to be thinking about. And then the last trend there is the L&D revolution. For those of you that are working in L&D, it's in crazy time. We know for a fact that the World Economic Forum is saying that, even though 85 million jobs will be displaced, we've got 97 million new ones, which means a difference of 12 million new ones. How are we possibly expected to keep up with that, right? We've got to, as an L&D function, we've got to look for partners outside to come in and help us be thinking about the skills development and how we work with our people. There's a lot of feedback to say that the old L&D ways internally weren't working. We can see that stat there that 12% of employees only applied their new learning skills through their L&D programs. That 70% of employees felt they did not have the expertise to do their jobs. So how are we thinking about this in the skills economy, the connection, and are we trying to take it all on because it's impossible? How do we build the right ecosystem to be able to deliver? We've seen some really interesting trends in the L&D space. Never before has L&D need to be so interactive. It needs to be highly personalized. People want to immerse themselves in the experience. They want to be able to see performance and data of how they're doing. We're realizing that learning culture starts at the top. So many times I see this in companies wanting to put individuals on top leadership saying, let's get everyone into training, but they're not doing the work themselves. They need to be doing the work too. L&D programs now need an element of psychological safety like never before. We're seeing that on-demand learning is something that is hugely beneficial, and that we're now less looking for instructors. We're looking for virtual instructors and online training programs that are designed in a way that they are more social, but they're bite-sized in content, and they're micro learning opportunities. What's been fascinating for me to see is that so often we send people on these one-day workshop training, and they're great for connecting and getting excited and motivated. And if you've ever been to one of those, you'll know that you have all the good intentions. You learn some information, you promise yourself you're going to go back and you're going to apply it in the world of work. You get back to work, it's super busy, time is crazy, and before you know it, a week, a month has passed, you've forgotten the information and you haven't applied it. What we know is that just after 6 days, people start to forget the information that they retained. So if you really want to design an intervention that changes behavior and really has a deep learning, you've got to do it over time. It's got to be continuous. If there's got to be a level of repetition, and it's got to be micro, it's got to be practical so it fits into busy schedules, but it's got to keep coming back to drive behavior change. So all of these trends are coming together and they're having this massive impact on the world of work, but it's also having a huge impact on leadership, right? So what does it really mean for leadership throughout all of this, right? We are seeing that we have this concept that leaders drive culture, right? Am I right? Can I get a feel in the room? Leaders drive culture. If you can hit the chat box now and say yes if you agree with that. Leaders definitely drive culture, and they are responsible for driving culture. And I see that this is true, right? I would absolutely say that leaders do drive culture, but I would say that they're not the only ones driving culture. And we are seeing this. Employees are demanding a different way of working, right? This is what is happening in the world today. It's not no longer just leaders. It's employees are demanding a different way of culture of working, and it's driving the culture. There are a new set of values and priorities that are driving the world of work, and it's not just coming from the top. In fact, it's coming from all levels, and it might be exactly what is in dispute. So the employee value proposition has shifted completely. So employees now want, above all else, they want flexibility around the way they work. And it's flexibility not just in the way they work; it's in their mindset, it's in everything, and it's needed for organizations too. Well-being is right up there at the top. It's so important. Belonging, the sense of belonging, being valued, being connected, being understood, being part of something is so important to people. Being able to contribute, and understanding that purpose. Purpose is critical. It's not just about the company's purpose, it's about tying the individual purpose to the organization's purpose and making sure that there is a connection. And this new employee value proposition is underlying these trends, and it is shifting the culture of organizations. And we're seeing that when employees are choosing the organizations that they want to work for, 63% of employees are making sure that work-life balance is a top need for them, right? So the stats are there. And the reality is leadership ready? Is your organization flexing and adapting? Do they really care about these four things that we've just spoken about, or are they just paying lip service to it? And this is where it really comes back to this idea of mental models, and how these are influencing these trends and where we really are. Because from what I'm seeing in organizations that we work with, there is a tug of war of values. What's really happening in organizations is that people are saying that they agree with flexibility, but then they're not changing some of their structures and the way that they work. There seems to be this underlying tension, and why some organizations seem to be struggling with the acceptance or moving with these trends is because there's something deeper going on, and there's a tug of war of values. If we go right all the way back to the beginning of the presentation, you saw me speak about the iceberg model, or the levels of perspective. And you'll see here, we've chatted about the events, the pandemic, remote work. It put a whole lot of patterns in place. Our systemic structures are under strain, but most of all, our mental models are under strain. It's purpose versus efficiency. Which is it? Purpose that drives results, or efficiency? This idea of labor versus talent, time versus output, continuously paying people for their time, not the output, length of service versus impact, productivity versus control, competitors versus collaborators, that example of Unilever and Vodacom using each other, flexibility versus bureaucracy and control, and this idea of employee experience should be enjoyable, not just a means to the end, right? And lastly, this idea of this vision changing. People are wanting to work for companies that are more human, they're inspiring, they're collaborative, and they are bent on creating an employee experience that is meaningful and enjoyable for all. So let me ask you this question, and you don't have to enter this into the chat, but I hope you have a piece of paper in front of you, and I'd love for you just to honestly answer yes or no, and you can just write a Y or N next to each question. But what are some of your beliefs about work, and do they fit the new model? So do you feel guilty when you only work 9 to 5, like you've not done enough? Are you somehow just tied to this 8 hour day? Do you expect team members to be on all the time? Now, wait for this one because I know many of you are saying, no, 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 no. But does your behavior send a different message? Do you send emails after hours? Do you phone people around the clock? Are you on Slack after hours, etc.? Do you believe, and you've got to be really honest with yourself, do you believe people are slacking off when working from home and that they'll be more productive in the office? Do you get frustrated when team members seemingly prioritize their yoga or lunch breaks or whatever the case is over work? Do you still track the amount of time people work and believe that they are more dedicated? Do you say things like, oh, he always goes above and beyond, he's always here after hours, and believe that they're more dedicated than someone who's trying to get their work done in a specific set of hours? Do you believe people are paid to do a job and they should just get on with it and not ask any questions? Do you sometimes think to yourself, mental health and well being has no place in the workplace, and say things like, leave your emotions at the door? Are you still rewarding tenure over contribution? Is your identity so wrapped up in your work that you don't know who you would be without it, and you can't understand why others don't think like you? If you said yes to some or more of these questions, and I hope you were really honest with yourself, because I know that I said yes to some of these questions. Then it probably means that your mental models, someone said they've got goosebumps, your mental models are potentially outdated. Or it's okay that they're there, but you need to be honest about them and you need to align your organization with those. And I'll talk a little bit more about it in a second. But the reality is that a lot of mental models have not caught up with the rate of change. So remember that stat right in the beginning. I said I'm going to come back to that stat. So 77% of employees found themselves to be more productive working remotely, but 64% of managers still say that they believe that in-office employees are higher performers than remote employees. Now, that is a belief. It's not necessarily the truth, but a belief is what influences the way we reward and behave. So what's scary about that belief is that then the next stat says 76 believe in-office workers are more likely to be promoted. So which is basically saying that managers will more likely promote those people who seem to be working longer hours, or in office, and they can see what they're doing. But then how does this affect people, women and people of color, etc., who prefer to work from home compared to white men, right? This is an interesting stat that we're seeing that came out. If we're not cautious about this, we're going to further increase the gender wage gap and so on. So it's really interesting. We've got to get to grips with this understanding that our mental models and our belief systems are driving the way we behave. And there's this huge change in values and there's a huge shift. And so many of us, I don't think, have quite got our heads around this yet. But the old system used to be life fits in around work. But the new system is that, or the new belief is that work needs to fit into life. And we really need to think about that. Most of the generation, most of the workforce is saying that work needs to fit into life. So engagement has taken on a new meaning. And this one belief has huge consequences for the way that we work. And if you don't believe in that belief, if it's not an agreed on belief, you're going to struggle to accept all the other changes, right? And as an organization and as a leader, you've got to think about, well, how are we connecting the dots? You know, the truth of the matter is you've got to get clear on your values. Who are you as an individual and who are you as an organization? Because if you keep saying that you agree with flexibility and purpose and all of these key priorities, yet your structures and systems and the way you make decisions are not in alignment with that, you're not going to retain your staff. You making a decision to keep your values or your beliefs, and some of them you may want to hold on to, is fine, but then you need to clearly communicate them and you need to let the chips fall where they are, because it was like a great example of this is a crypto company that recently told their employees that they all have to come back to work, and if they don't like it, they can leave. Guess what happened? Lots of them left. Okay. So you've got to get clear on this, and we've got to start being able to stitch who we are with, which is the values, who we are with the why, which is the purpose, and the culture, how we bring it all together, the what and how we do things, right? And how we make decisions and so on. And this has a huge impact for leaders. So what we're seeing is that never before have leaders needed to be able to keep the three C's, or should I say the three C's have taken on new meaning for them. So that is communication, collaboration, and connection have to be at the forefront of everything that leaders do. We need leaders who are able to enact values, or not just espouse values, not just give it lip service, but truly enact them and believe in them and can cultivate the culture throughout the organization. Hierarchy is out. It's not working anymore. We need these network teams. We need to disperse decision making at speed. Flexibility is a mindset, not just a benefit that leaders are needing to take on. We need to be future fit. This means thinking about multiple scenarios all the time. Retention is one-to-one. I'm sure you got that through today's presentation. It's not a one fits all. It's a one-to-one situation, and you've got to have data to understand your workforce and their needs. We need to be building strong leaders at all levels and not at the top. We need to be able to measure performance in a new way that is directly about output and not about time. We need to realize that the top-down way of doing things is not the only way, and in most cases, it's actually not working. We need to bring in the middle layer. We need everybody working on learning, culture, and change together to be able to really have an impact, and we need to create constant feedback loops. The most important thing you can do is to keep understanding where your people are truly at. And lastly, there we have to create people-centric set of leadership skills. So the World Economic Forum says that we are needing a set of skills that are more human-centered than ever before. If you look at this list, we've got self-management, flexibility, resilience and stress, critical thinking and problem solving, creativity and innovation, analytical thinking and innovation, technology use, design and programming, and leadership and social influences. These skills are so important for leaders in order to be able to take organizations forward. And the reality is, as I mentioned in my 3-minute intro today, 80% of leaders rated themselves as ineffective leading virtually. And so what this really means for us is that when we think about our organizations, we've got to realize that it's this middle layer that's going to take our organizations forward. And the questions you've got to ask yourself to grapple with all these trends: are your leaders at all levels empowered with these skills? How well does cascading work throughout the organization? What I mean by that is, how well are your leaders able to cascade goals, priorities, connect them to purpose, organizational purpose, and individual purpose throughout the organization, and make that connection for people? How much self-organization is allowed? Are you building a culture of leaders? Are your leaders able to communicate and connect individual with organizational purpose? And can they provide flexibility? And do they know how to create psychological safety, well-being, and belonging? Because the reality is that we need leaders at all levels, not just at the top, to be the glue that can connect purpose, vision, and mission and take it forward, and to really leap into this next frontier, and to be able to understand these trends on the individual level and carry it forward. That's it, everybody. Thank you very much. It was lovely to be here with you all today. And you can see my details on the slide if you'd like to make contact. And I realize I've gone a little over, so thank you very much for the additional time there.
Thank you, Jackie. Wow, what an amazing presentation, and lots of thought-provoking points that you've given us today. Your passion for what you do has shone through in your talk, and I can now see why no one could leave your table during our networking session that we had this morning. Thank you for sharing all these key points and enlightening us and helping us to keep up with the mega trends that we're all facing right now.